Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. We are back after a little break last week. I hope everyone had a happy Valentine's Day. Thank you all for joining us on our last Wednesday class of the Canadian Whiskey Certification. We are joined, as always, by Gina Fawcett, Dave Mitten, who is the newly ranked Canadian Whiskey 2024 Brand Ambassador of the Year.
Thank you.
How exciting. Congratulations. And Ricky Ramirez, who is our Spanish language translator for the program. Today, we're talking all about blended whiskey and rye whiskey. So without further ado, Gina and Dave, take it away.
Hi, everyone. So excited I guess I can't see really anyone right now, but so happy everyone has made it this far. Week 4. Hopefully everyone had a really nice Valentine's Day and break last week. Gina, did you have a nice Valentine's Day?
I had a lovely Valentine's Day. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. Someone said congratulations. Thank you. Very much appreciate it. Yeah, we're going to have some fun today. We've got 4 whiskeys, so make sure you've got your J.P. Wiser's Triple Barrel Rye, Gooder Ham and Worts, Lot 40, and your Lot 40 Dark Oak. I'll be back. I'm going to let Gina talk now. Gina, go for it.
All right, here we go. We're going to dive right in today. Our last Wednesday class. It's coming to an end. You've made it so far, but thank you for joining us. And let's dive into blended whiskey. So blended whiskey and rye whiskey, both very important, right, to the Canadian whiskey category. As we've kind of gone through history and production and why blended whiskey is, so popular in Canada. Canadian whiskey is very well known to be blended whiskey, right? And that's largely because of the production process. Because a lot of distilleries in Canada are making everything at 100% grain builds. At the end, when they've got 100% corn, 100% wheat, 100% rye, to bring those flavors together, they've got to blend those different whiskeys, right? So very well known for blended whiskey, but let's really dive into it and what that means. We're going to talk about blended whiskey today from the viewpoint of it coming as, an art and as a science. So we're going to look at this like a blender's palette, like a painter's palette, okay? What makes up our pigments on this painter's palette? What's going into our blend? What's the pigments for our blend? So one of those pigments or multiple of those pigments can be the grain choice, right? Corn, wheat, rye, barley, malted rye, malted barley, any cereal grain that you're making whiskey out of is going to contribute different flavor components. Fermentation. How is this whiskey? Well, it's not a whiskey in fermentation, but how is it being fermented, right? How long is it being fermented? The temperature, the yeast that's being used. We know now that yeast makes a lot of different flavor congeners: fruity, floral, green, grassy, soapy notes, even sulfur notes. Some of them we want to remove, some of them we want to keep in, right? But those can add different pigments or different flavor components to our blend. Distillation style. Lots of different distillation styles out there. At Hiram Walker, we're doing a single column distillation, giving us a nice full-bodied, full flavorful whiskey. A double column distillation, which is going to strip out a lot of those grain and yeast characters, right? Giving us a very light style whiskey. And then maybe something like a column into a pot where we can really make some accurate cut points, concentrating up the heart of a specific whiskey, concentrating up those flavor components. Maturation certainly could be, lend itself to these pigments. So the ABV it's going into the barrel is going to determine different wood extracts and what's happening throughout maturation, evaporation, of course, the type of wood being used, what wood extracts you're getting, what's being taken out, how much of those, right? Is it a finishing barrel? Was there something in that cask, I should say? Was there something in that cask before and lending flavor to this whiskey? Time, how long is it being matured, right? And then the terroir that we talked about last week, how much is that cask breathing? How much oxygen is interacting with the alcohol to come up with ethyl acetate over time? All these chemical reactions that are happening over time due to the terroir of your warehouses. And then bottling. Different flavor components come out at different ABVs. Whether or not we filter the whiskey is also a component that can go into the blend visually. Okay, the blend. Like I said, we're going to look at this as an art and as a science. So we have our artiste, Mr. Bob Ross, joining us today. And he is going to paint for us a beautiful blend of whiskey here. Now, the size of these casks represent the amount of whiskey in this blend of each of these whiskeys. So there's a lot of different whiskeys in this blend, right? We've got primarily corn. It's double column distilled, aged in new American barrels. So it's a very light, soft whiskey, giving a lot of wood extract to this, okay? Then we've got, when we look at two different rye whiskeys in this blend, one is single column distilled, big, full, much like an American style, right? At 100% rye. Bourbon barrels, giving us a little dried fruit notes. Now we've got a rye that's column and then pot distilled, so super concentrated with those hearts because we've made cut points on that pot distillation. Brand new American barrels, giving us that vanilla and coconut. We've got two different wheat whiskeys going into this blend, a single column again in new American oak, that pot distilled wheat in new American oak, and then two different barley whiskeys, giving us a little nutty character. Once used bourbon barrels and brand new casks as well. So lots of different layers here of flavor. I can't hear you, but take a guess on what whiskey this is. It is Gooderham and Worts. 7 different whiskeys, 4 different grains, right? 2 different types of wood, lots of layers of flavor going into this. Now, let's talk about our master blender. So Dr. Don Livermore, for our students, you all got to meet him last Thursday, or not last week, but the week before, in our workshop session, our private workshop session. But for those of you that are joining us that aren't one of our students, this is our master blender. He's been at the Hiram Walker Distillery for 27 years now. He's a microbiologist. He's a scientist. But he has a PhD in brewing and distilling. He really is kind of the central nervous system of the whole production. This is where it all comes together, okay? Dr. Don created a flavor wheel, which I know for our students he talked about in his session. But let's kind of go over this. So he created this flavor wheel from a blender's point of view, how he looks at flavor when he's creating a new blend. So he's looking at the center of this wheel as flavor really being derived from yeast, grain, and wood, the main components. Of course, there's other factors, but these are the main derivatives of flavor that he's looking at. Now, that second ring is really describing like the flavors that you're going to get, or the flavor congeners you're going to get from yeast, the types of grain, the types of wood, right? And then the descriptors are on that third ring. This is what you and I often use to describe what we're tasting, what we're nosing, right? From a whiskey. This is how we describe a whiskey. But what he is looking for, here comes some science, is that fourth ring. So tomorrow in our private session with Dr. Don, he's going to go through some lab equipment that he uses in the distillery, and some that he's invented and is widely used in the distilling industry. But one of the mechanisms he uses measures the molecular structure, or the molecular compounds, I should say, of these flavors, these descriptors. What actual chemical compound is it that's producing that flavor? And he's measuring each one of them. And as they are measured in parts per billion, he then puts them on a bar graph and creates a polar histogram, which wraps around this flavor wheel. So every time that there is a bottling of Güterham and Worts, this polar histogram, it has to measure out so that it looks exactly like this sitting over this flavor wheel. Now you can see cask stands out a lot, right? And when we looked at this blend, there were two types of wood, a lot of New American oak. So that makes a lot of sense, right? A little bit of finish in there, finishing barrels, even though none of these whiskeys are finished in a second barrel. Some of them are aged in once used bourbon barrels, right? So it's coming across as a finishing barrel in the measuring. Corn and rye are the big players on the grain. Not surprising, right? That's the biggest grain components. Those are the biggest grain components in this whiskey. So this is how Güterham and Worts will always look. And you can see around this polar histogram, he's even put the bars of how much of the whiskey has been column distilled, how much has been column and then pot distilled, and how much of it in there is that double column distillation. Remember, only one whiskey was double column distilled, the corn. So it's a little over half, right? And then clear to the right-hand side of this measures how much of each barrel being used in the aging process, bourbon and New American. Okay, so Bob is back. Let's look at another whiskey he's going to paint for us. This one is triple barrel rye. So another blend, a rye whiskey, right? But a blend, primarily rye, single column distilled, once used bourbon casks. Much like that rye, that was a big component of Güterham and Worts, but this is the big player here. Then we have a little bit of corn. Now this is double column distilled, but used Canadian barrels. So this is really sitting in the background, kind of acting, this is the base. This is acting as the glue for these big flavoring whiskeys, the rye, and then the wheat adds a lot of flavor, a little bit of breadiness there from that pot distillation and New American barrels. Okay, back to our flavor wheel. Looking at triple barrel rye, how this one sits, you can see age is really coming out, finish, right? Because that rye is being aged in those ex-bourbon barrels. Rye is the biggest component here on the grains. No surprise there, right? Fruity floral notes, also no surprise because those are kind of in the hearts. So that big rye is going to get those. We're also going to get those from that pot distilled wheat. Okay, so Dave, I think I'm going to pass it over to you to take us through our first two whiskeys, Güterham and Worts and Triple Barrel Rye.
Let's do it, Gina. So we're going to do the little Güterham and Worts. I was going to try to talk like Bob Ross, but that wouldn't go over well right now. I appreciate how many people got excited about Bob Ross.
Oh, Bob.
R.I.P. So the Güterham and Worts earlier in the course, talking about the history. And as Gina's talking all about blending today, this is one of our exceptional whiskeys to talk about. I mean, we've gone over how it's this beautiful, luxurious gold. Now, talking about how in the majority of that double column distilled soft corn, almost an equal amount of rye, some column and pot distilled rye, some column distilled rye. You've got a little bit of the wheat and barley. I find this is one, and I might have said this already, but nosing it and taking your first sip, you kind of I personally walk through the grains. Like, I get fresh baked bread right away from the wheat. A little bit of the nuttiness of the barley. I certainly get like red apples, a little bit of honeycomb. And that's, 90% New American oak. You're going to get the rich, warm vanilla, toffee caramel. 10% ex-bourbon cast, a little bit of dried fruit notes. But first sip, you get that rich, lovely, soft corn right away. And then you do feel a little bit of that heat, the spice of the rye. This is a beautiful one on its own. We've talked about it in cocktails, how it makes a beautiful whiskey sour, a Toronto. But yeah, I do love this one on its own, but it's great to play around with cocktails. Any thoughts on this? I want to see if anyone's got any tasty notes for me. I kind of just say the same things over and over. I want to learn from you all what you're getting. They're thinking about it. You can help me.
I do like the happy little accidents comment.
Yes. I'm a happy little accident. I feel like I need some help today, people. I left Detroit at 5 a.m. I drove to Toronto, so I'm a little slow today. Sweet ass spice combo almost makes me think of when you grill honey. Hey, there you go. Black currant.
Mm-hmm.
Still
big red gum.
Oh, I like that. I don't think I've missed that before if you said it, Nicole. Yeah, I like that a lot. Honey, absolutely. Heather, oak, vanilla. Kind of stuck on that big red gum now. Butterscotch. Yeah, I almost like get an English toffee almost off of it. Does everyone have enough left for today? Did anyone drink all of their Gooder Hammond worts over the last month? Fresh pear, yeah. It's like the pear, the apple. I kind of get off of that. Cinnamon, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm really stuck on that big red gum too.
Yeah, I like that.
I'm totally using that.
You drank it all. Let's have to get you some more.
No surprise, Kyle. No surprise.
I like the sugar oatmeal, brown sugar oatmeal too. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Jasmine's looking at something. I don't know what she's doing there. She's looking at something. Oh, she's gone. Yeah. All right. She drank it all. We'll have to get some at Basan. Oh, saving for graduation. I like that. Oh, William ordered a bottle. I think it sounds pretty good. I love this one. Should we move on to the next one, Gina?
Let's do. I love this one too.
I just like hearing everyone's comments on it. So that's like, and again, to kind of, I think we've said it before. I don't want to repeat myself too much, but as Canadian whiskey drinkers go, it's a very complex blend, obviously, compared to traditional styles. Gina and I have noticed, certainly like traveling around the U.S., bourbon drinkers, a lot of them will go towards like, the bigger high rye lot 40, but a lot of bourbon drinkers gravitate towards this one too. If you have a bottle in your back bar and you've got a bourbon drinker at the bar and they want to try something different, that's one that we recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Cereal notes. No, not at all. I mean, it's made from cereal grain. So that's like very correct. There's nothing I think you all know this. You can't nose or taste anything. You can't be wrong. Whatever you're smelling, whatever you're tasting, that's just you.
Mm-hmm.
Happy little accidents. Beautiful. Just beautiful. All right. So the JP Weiser's Triple Barrel Rye. Only available in the U.S., this blend. So our Canadian friends on here, this bottle, you can't buy it on the shelves. Here in Canada, you'll have to go to the USA or come over and hang out at my house. Or Gina's. Look at her back bar. So this, as we said, it's a Canadian whiskey made with the American palate in mind. That's what marketing will tell you. And I completely agree with it. Instead of that traditional style of the light, soft corn and a little pinch of rye, this is 60% rye. From looking at the graph we had, the histogram, 37% of that soft corn, 3% of a column and pot distilled wheat, triple barrel for a reason, new American oak, warming soft vanilla, sweet toffee caramel, ex-bourbon cast, your raisins, dried fruit notes, and then what's the other third? Yes, Canadian whiskey cask. Emphasizes the grain and yeast characteristics. So I kind of always get a little bit of autumn florals, but I mean, right bang on the nose, I'm getting rye bread. Almost like, might be because I had one last night, but a rockin' rye. It's like a sweet, sweet rye note coming from that soft vanilla, toffee caramel, all the rye. There's always something that I think it's the wheat. I think I honestly get a little bit of breadiness on it. So much caramel. Yeah, I get like you get the sweetness off of it. Old school honey snaps, frog and low. I know what you're talking about. And then first sip at 90 proof, it's not too powerful, but it packs a little wallop. This is great in an old fashioned or a Manhattan, which I think we've talked about before. Generally, I don't really sip on rye on its own, but this has got a softness to it that I could drink this. Little Boilermaker, maybe a IPA or something to go along with this. Red apple on the nose, I like that. Almost like a candied apple at Halloween.
And in the US, if you're in the US, the price is very good for a cocktail menu.
Absolutely.
Something to note.
Dried plums, cinnamon. Yep. Absolutely. Someone just said they wish it was in Vancouver. That'd be nice. And if you know what, I will say this for Canadians, if anyone sees, because it might still be on shelves. There was a JP Weiser's triple barrel rye in Canada a few years back, but it's a different recipe inside. So it's not what you're drinking now, if you see one on shelves in Canada. Old school fruit cocktail. Oh, I like that. Toplack, Dr. Toplack, nice sipper. He knows his whiskey. Toast rye, yeah, absolutely. Big fan. I don't get to drink this one enough. I don't see it everywhere. And it's for those of you that are buying, it's a pretty damn good price. It's usually under $20 a bottle. 5 to 9 year old whiskeys. It's great. Can't go wrong with it.
You cannot go wrong.
Rye tie with this, yes. Someone actually said that the other day on another test. I like that. Stone fruit, green apples for sure. Rye tie, yes. I'm going to get someone to make me a rye tie next time I'm sitting in a bar, Gina. Where am I going to go next? Where am I going next?
I'd be happy to. I don't know. Where are you next?
I'm going to Vancouver next for Vancouver Cocktail Week. So I need to find one there.
There we go.
All right. Shall we continue?
Let's continue. We're drinking rye. Continue to sip on your rye as we talk about rye whiskey. Okay, so let's review a little. I know we kind of been talking about it through the tasting, but just to review a little, this is actually from week 1, back in the history section. But what does it mean to be a Canadian rye? So remember, our first commercial distillers in Canada were English, right? What they brought with them was their ability to distill wheat, make wheat whiskeys. Then we have the Germans migrating to Canada on both coasts, a train system being built, and innovation taking place. So a little bit of rye, 5 to 10% going into our wheat whiskeys. This was in the 1800s. So you either had a whiskey or a rye, but that rye, and to this day, can mean mostly corn, mostly wheat, and a little bit of rye. Okay, that's your traditional style, right? Regulations. There is one category of Canadian whiskey. All Canadian whiskeys, all styles follow this one set of rules. However, this one set of rules is called Canadian whiskey, Canadian rye whiskey, or rye whiskey. You can see they put rye in the title of their regulations twice. That's how important of a grain the rye is to Canadian whiskey. And when we look at the different styles, it's many, many, many different styles, okay? But we go from the traditional style that we just talked about, which in today's age is usually primarily corn, with a little bit of rye. There's no minimum amount of rye in there. It could be 1%, could be 10%. Like the 10-year-old, right? That is a traditional style, very light, soft, sweeter whiskey. A rye blend, like what you just tasted, triple barrel rye, you might still be sipping on it. Or a 100% rye whiskey, big, bold, spicy yet sweet from the barrels. So lots of different styles within. Okay, it doesn't stick to very specifics when it comes to grain or wood here. So let's look at common practices. You all know me by this point. I like to compare Canadian whiskey to American whiskey because we tend to know American whiskey, understand the category better, right? So let's first look at the beginning of the process, where in the US we would call making a mash bill, right? In Canada, a lot of the time, not everyone, but traditionally speaking, they're going to produce 100% grain billed whiskeys here. So we're not really making a mash bill. We're just choosing our grain for that whiskey. However, in the US, for a rye, it has to be a minimum of 51% rye. Usually has some barley in the mash bill. Not always, but usually. And sometimes some other grains. But those grains are going to be blended during the mash. So making your mash bill, right? Where in Canada, if we decide to blend them later, it's going to be at the end of the process. Fermentation. Because we don't have in our Canadian rye, if we're doing 100% rye here, we're not going to have endogenous enzymes, meaning coming from a malt or a malted grain. So we're going to use exogenous enzymes. Much like yeast is cultivated in a lab, so are these enzymes. Okay, they're just not coming from within malt. But this is going to help our process along. It's going to help break up these large starch strains so that the yeast have more digestible units to start to go to work. And in the US, they're going to use some endogenous enzymes coming from malted barley usually. But a lot of them are also using exogenous enzymes. You know, it takes a decent amount of malted barley to really not use exogenous enzymes and be efficient enough in the process. So you really want to help the yeast along as much as you can and more quickly, right? And so using exogenous enzymes are very common practice in the US as well. Distillation. There's lots of different distillation styles on both sides of the border here. Most common practices in Canada are going to be double column distillation, single column distillation, or column and then into a pot still. Of course, there's combo stills and all kinds of stuff being used, but those are really your most common practices here. In the US, your distillation for rye whiskey cannot exceed 160 proof, okay? Most are going to use a single column distillation and then go into a doubler, which we talked about in the production week. Usually there's not cut points being made on these whiskeys. Same at Hiram Walker, our single column distillation, although we're not going into a doubler after that because we have 100% copper still, we're not making cut points on that single column distillation. All of that juice is going right into the barrel, okay? Same for most American ryes. Maturation in Canada, minimum 3 years of aging in small oak, under 700 liter casks, but any type of wood can be used. In the US, there is no minimum age statement on rye whiskey. It does have to be aged in charred oak, new charred oak, excuse me. But you could age it, I mean, this is silly because wood is expensive, but you could age it for 5 minutes if you really wanted to, and put out a whiskey that way. Now, if it's a straight rye, then it does have a minimum aging, and that's 2 years. Okay. Canada, minimum 3. US rye, no minimum unless it's a straight rye, which is 2 years minimum. And then finally, just on the topic of blending, when we're talking about rye whiskey or not, but right now we're talking about ryes, in Canada, we're going to blend different whiskeys, rye, corn, wheat, etc., different ages, different barrel types to produce a specific flavor profile at the end, right? And we're typically going to do that after maturation. In the US, the regulations are very different. Most are we like to use the word mingle if we're not labeling it a blended whiskey. And the labeling regulations are very different. So, quite often distilleries are going to mingle or blend same mash bills, maybe different ages, but same barrel type. Has to be new charred oak. So typically the same exact barrel type. And then they're going to produce their different labels that way. One example I love to use is Wild Turkey. They make some really fantastic whiskeys, and they have 2 mash bills, a bourbon mash bill and a rye mash bill. But they've got Russell's Reserve, they've got Wild Turkey 101, they've got many different labels and flavor profiles. And the way that they're doing that is blending different places, maybe in the rick house, different ages, etc., different ABVs to produce a different flavor profile. Okay. And you're often going to see, some are blending different mash bills, and quite often those are going to come from different distilleries. So completely different whiskeys from different distilleries blended together that in the US, by regulation, does not have to be labeled a blended whiskey. As long as they follow the rye whiskey regulations, both whiskeys or 3 whiskeys or whatever you've got going in there, then it can be labeled a rye or a straight rye. So the labeling regulations on blended whiskey is quite different in the US than in Canada. And finally, let's dive into why rye. Why is what's happening with rye that's making this grain so big, powerful, and effective in our whiskeys, right? So this is lignin, and I've stolen this straight from Dr. Don Livermore. But this is lignin. You see a plant cell here. Lignin's at the bottom. You've got your cellulose, your hemicellulose, much like we talked about during maturation with wood. This is a plant cell, right? Rye is a plant cell. So it's going to be made up of the same things, cellulose, hemicellulose, lignin, tying it all together. And when we really look at these components in rye versus corn, wheat, or barley, you can see that lignin is much higher here, okay? So there's more lignin, and that is what's making rye very unique amongst the grains. More lignin than the other grains. So here's the molecular structure of lignin. That's the molecule. When we heat it, we're going to break it apart, okay? And when we break this molecular structure apart, we're going to have smaller molecules, guaiacol, creosol, 4-ethylguaiacol, eugenol, 4-ethylphenol. They're all on your flavor wheel. Look at those right by the rye section. These are the flavor components that they are bringing to life. Smoky, burnt, spicy, sweet smoke, clove, very popular when we talk about rye, right? Now, when we pot distill rye, we're actually increasing these flavor components because at higher malker, when we pot distill, we're doing a very slow distillation so that we can make more accurate cut points, capturing the heart, really concentrating up those flavor components. And all of these in our rye whiskey is right there in the heart. So one more look at this flavor wheel. When we look at rye, on the flavor wheel, rye is spicy. Every one of those descriptors on that third ring starts with the word spicy. In some way, shape, or form, whether it's baking spices or pepper notes or bacon spicy, smoky spicy, rye is bringing a spicy note to your whiskey. And on that note, Dave Minton, it is time to taste some rye whiskey.
I just had a thought from a couple slides back with the why rye. We need to get Dr. Don to get that tattoo.
Well, I got him a t-shirt a couple years ago that said that lignin was the most underappreciated molecule.
I remember.
Yeah.
I remember.
He wears it. Just saying.
Lot 40. Let's try some Lot 40. Let's tell stories about Lot 40. I don't know if you can tell, but I've kicked my feet up, Gina. I'm relaxing today.
Oh boy.
Yep.
Here we go.
I'm almost delirious. So Lot 40, 100% rye whiskey, very, very unique to traditional Canadian whiskey, being all soft corn, a little bit of rye added in there. That's what our grandparents, our parents, aunts, uncles, everyone grew up drinking. Even myself, when I started bartending back in the late 90s, it was a dark time for cocktails, certainly in Canada and everywhere, really. People weren't drinking whiskey cocktails, really. It was more of a time of cocktails made in glasses shaped like that. They were pink and fruity and juicy and neon colored and very vodka based. Sex and the City ruled the airwaves. That was pop culture. There wasn't a big need for it, but someone at our company decided, let's put out 100% rye whiskey during this time. So what do you think happened when Lot 40 was released in the late 90s, when it was the time of the Cosmo and the Purple Haze and drinks like that? Anyone think it did well? Emma knows. She was there slinging drinks with me. It failed. Yeah. Connor gets it. It didn't do very well. And I mean, obviously people were drinking whiskey back then, but it wasn't a big thing. So it failed really badly. Like rye was not a thing. Bourbon wasn't even exploding around the world. Irish whiskey, Japanese whiskey wasn't. So we kind of swept it on the rug. We forgot about it. At the distillery, we have a lot of our bottles, most of them from 1857 in our archives, but we didn't save a bottle of Lot 40, the original. Now, fast forward into the early 2000s, New York City, London, England, bartenders start bringing out old books from the late 1800s, early 1900s. They start reviving classic cocktails. They're pulling out Manhattans, Old Fashions, Vieux Carrés, you name it, Diamondbacks, Martinis. And Mad Men replaces Sex and the City for pop culture, and everyone wants to wear a suit and tie at lunch and have a martini or a Manhattan. Now, someone that are, bourbon started exploding around the planet. Irish whiskey, Japanese whiskey followed suit. So imagine someone at our company said, remember that 100% rye that failed so miserably a decade ago? Why don't we release it again? And at this time, Dr. Don, who you now know and you'll be speaking with tomorrow or listening to, took a shot at it. So he took 100% unmalted rye grain, column distilled, pot distilled afterwards, New American Oak level 2 char, and he made the Lot 40 that we know and love today. And, take a look there. It's a beautiful, beautiful amber color. Now, for a whiskey that failed so miserably a decade earlier, the year that was released under Dr. Don's watch, it won Canadian Whiskey of the Year. And it won again the next year. And it's been taking all these accolades, and bartenders started paying attention. I started paying attention. I used enough of this in my bars and restaurants that the company came to me and asked if I wanted to come work with them. True story. Love the stuff. So it is beautiful. And again, you heard me say I don't think about sipping rye on its own, but this is a rye I will sip on its own. But I do love it in cocktails. You've got all of that rye bread, the baking spices, cinnamon clove, lots of citrus and floral notes. Sipping it, it's not packing a wallop, but it's packing a little slap. Like it's waking you up. It's waking up my senses. So when I make an old fashioned, a Manhattan, it works beautifully. What's someone saying here? Dry oak, clove, dry mid palate, spicy finish, spiced pear and chocolate. This person's going for my job. Green apple in the background, followed by baked. Megan's going for my job. Green tea, yes. You know what? I have a lot of people say green tea. So, I mean, that's a thing. We were talking about this yesterday. Everywhere you go, you see a lot of boozy stirred drinks. I was out and about in Detroit last night, and a few places made me some. And I went to one spot, and they made a tall, lively, refreshing drink with it because this has that elegance when you mix it with a sherry or some citrus and bubbles. It works beautifully like that as well. Pink peppercorn for sure. Absolutely. Oh, I love this one. I feel like there's some favorites on here of Lot 40.
While we're sipping on this one, before you go to the next one, there was one question that we should answer.
Do it.
About does Canadian whiskey production never use malted barley? Not really. I mean, unless we're producing 100% malted barley whiskey, which we do a little, but it's really as a flavoring component into a blend. But, some distilleries are if they're building a mash bill or something, but for the most part, if you're building 100% grain builds, it's 100% rye.
Yeah. 100%. See what I did there? 100%.
I see what.
And obviously, we can't speak for other distilleries. There's over 300 more across Canada. But yeah, as a general rule, cassis and violet. Figs.
That's a floral note, though.
We could just sit here and sip on this all day, but I guess we got to go on to the next one, don't we, Professor?
We do.
All right. Well, that's all right, because I'm a big fan of the next one. We're going to do the
Many people are.
Dark Oak. Now, apologies if you've already heard me ramble on with this story, but where Lot 40's become such a favorite with bar crew and whiskey nuts around the world, we tend to release... we do limited releases annually. We'll do age statements, cask strengths. We'll do we'll do barrel finishing. We'll do barrel finishing cask strengths. Dr. Don will have a lot of fun. Don't quote me on it, but he probably has Lot 40 laying down in more than 20 different barrel types right now at the distillery that we've been able to try out. He just released a port cask finish. And he might tell you about one he's releasing next year tomorrow, but I don't have the right to say it. We'll wait and see if he will tell you. And with that, it's always a few thousand bottles. Usually goes to Canada, the US, and the UK. And they sell out overnight, over a week, and it's a nice little treat. In March 2020, we all know what was happening then, or we've tried to forget it. The world started closing down. Unfortunately, that month, we released Lot 40 Dark Oak. So you can imagine, for a whiskey brand that's mostly popular in bars, that was not a good time to release that whiskey brand.
Why does this brand have such unfortunate beginnings?
We're a little guy. We like to fight for our right to party, so we're good. Wouldn't be as fun if it came as easy. You and I might not have jobs if it came that easy. So let's appreciate that. So, basically we looked at it. We're like, well, the world's got bigger problems. If this isn't going to sell very fast, we can't worry about that. But during the pandemic, like 2021, brand teams always send samples of whiskey away to whiskey award shows, hoping you get a silver or gold medal to put on your bottle at retail stores. And the World Whiskey Awards came back and said, congratulations, Lot 40 Dark Oak has won the world's best rye. And we were like, oh, the best Canadian whiskey. They're like, no, the world's best rye. So we were pretty pleased with that. And needless to say, we decided to just keep making it. And it's a regular expression that is for sale in Canada, the US, and the UK currently. Now, the difference with it is it starts off the same as Lot 40. 100% rye, column distilled, pot distilled, aged in new American oak, level 2 char. But the difference is we regauge this whiskey in level 4 char. That's 4, isn't it? Yes. And we up the proof. So where Lot 40 is 86 proof, Lot 40 Dark Oak is 96 proof. So it's going to be hotter. You're going to get a little more wood from that. But with the level 4 char, you're going to get almost more vanilla ice cream. You're going to get cinnamon. More florals on the nose. Little lavender and mint. You just cheers yourself?
No, I was just picking up my other glass because I like to go back and forth to like see the differences.
Yes, you cheered yourself. Milk caramel, I like that. Drier on the palate, more assertive. Oh, see, she's going for my job, Gina. You need to keep an eye on her. I just love this one. This one's great. It's and again, this is a beautiful straight rye to sip on its own. But you say someone made me a Vieux Carré with it the other day, and I was like, it's exceptional. Or what's your thing, Gina? When you do when you have your one drink a week, you usually do a Manhattan with Lot 40, and you'll do an old fashioned with Dark Oak.
Yes, my one drink a week.
You're very responsible.
I do like a Manhattan. That is for sure. Speaking of pandemic stories, mine was 5 o'clock Manhattans for a little while, which Dave is teasing because may have gotten out of hand a bit. Had to stop that ritual.
Never seen you get out of hand. You're the responsible one. We all know that. Yeah. Wait. We are getting loose today. I mean, why not? It's the second last class. We're gonna miss you guys.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna need to keep in touch while life moves forward. Yeah. Okay. Keep them coming. Spice Twix cookie. That's good. Either is Nicole crying or throwing up? She's crying. I didn't think she liked it. I got upset there. I was like, oh, Nicole doesn't like this. Yeah, apricot.
I would have to ask you all, which one do you prefer? Is there one you prefer? Let me rephrase that. Is there one that you prefer more for a cocktail and one that you would prefer more for sipping? Between Dark Oak and Lot 40.
Andrew Toplak likes the mellow spice finish.
Mm-hmm. For sipping, seems like Dark Oak is coming out for sipping. Yes. I mean, marketing likes to say bigger, bolder, unmistakable, right? It is bigger, bolder, Lot 40. Because that re-gauging in the cask, it's a higher proof. It's bigger, bolder. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, hey, this is, and kind of when this was made too, we looked at everybody at the company and said, you just almost went a little more American with this by making the proof higher. So it's like this, it's just not that Canadians don't have the same, well, our palates are different in Europe, Canada, America, everywhere. Even in America, the different parts of America, palates are different. But generally from my travels, my experience, like go to the US and people like a high proof in the US.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will say, since we mentioned pricing with triple barrel rye, Dark Oak is not ideal price-wise for cocktails. If you have a higher-end cocktail list that you can charge a little more for your beverage costs, then by all means, because it is beautiful in cocktails. But it's not really priced for your typical cocktail cost.
Yeah, we see
regular lot 40 is, yes.
It's. I mean, the dream is to see lot 40 on cocktail menus, and then dark oak if everyone's still feeling happy to have it on the back bar, and that way you can ask for a special drink, or it's nice for you to show off when a customer wants to try something different that they haven't had before. Chances are this is such a new product to Canada and the US that they might not know about it, and especially for you Americans, if you like showing off a different style of Canadian whiskey, this certainly is very unique compared to traditional styles. Yeah, see, Nicole, no problem. I mean, yeah, there are, like, it's funny enough, Lot 40 does extremely well in the UK cocktail scene. And I know a lot of it has to do with price. But in UK is one of those spots where I'll see Lot 40 on a lot of cocktail menus, and it'll be house whiskey at a lot of spots. But I'm seeing dark oak on cocktail menus at some higher end, like boutique hotels, like Nicole said, where they're charging pretty high prices for the drinks.
Mm-hmm. We've seen some amazing cocktails. The Crusta Rhymes, first of all, the name of that cocktail is so great. But Juliana Walkowski created that one, and it's fantastic with dark oak. Carly Hansen made a frozen cocktail with JP Weiser's 10-year-old, and then did an optional dark oak float on it. Hello, that was delicious.
So good.
And that was a really great way to make, for costing wise, to just have like a half ounce floating right on the top. That was delicious.
No, Kyle. Kyle's like, now we're just the Americans. Not at all. My favorite neighbors to the south. And I had.
Don't worry, Kyle. I'll beat him up for you.
Yeah, she will. Oh, come on. Americans like to make fun of Canadians quite a bit, and we love it. So we're a good friendly fire here. Aren't we your hat? What's our nickname? We're your hat. Something like that. Right, Gina?
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah, love this one. Love this one. Oh, the recipe for the Crusta Rhymes? Yes. Isn't that part of it?
Yes.
Well, we can send us an email and we'll get that for you. Or you know what? I'll post it like next week on my Instagram too, because I wanted to redo that with our new.
Good idea. And we'll post it on the Facebook page for our certification students. But Dave, if you post it on your Instagram for anyone who's watching that isn't part of the certification program, you could see it on there as well.
Blame Canada, exactly.
Well, we're gonna finish a few minutes early today. Give you a few minutes, but this is our last Wednesday class, so thank you for joining us. Like I said, we will see all of our students tomorrow with Dr. Dawn Livermore for our last class.
Hello. We did have 2 questions. I don't know if y'all want to
sure.
them real fast. I'll pop this one up from Megan.
Ooh, beating. Dave, I'll let you take this because you're the cocktail guy.
The term beating, you know what? Now I feel kind of older out of the loop. I've not heard of the term beating. Is it something you could explain to us, or you're like asking us if we know what it is? Huh.
Megan, let us know.
We'll look into this too. Now I'm very curious.
That looks like the question from Kim is our last one.
What do y'all mean by re-gauging? Is it finished in level 4 char cask or fully matured in level 4 casks? Dave, you want to take this one?
What do I mean, re-gauging? Yeah, it's just finished in level 4. So it sits in the level 2 char for a minimum of 3 years. And then Dr. Dawn basically does all the finishing with 100 days. for production purposes for the whiskeys. Wait, 100 or 200, Gina?
For this, let's ask him tomorrow. I think it's 100 for this one though, because the new oak. But let's double check that tomorrow in our workshop with him.
Perfect. Saved. And then we did hear from Megan here. So the soapy foam.
I've not heard of this. Now I'd want to inquire about it. Let me screenshot this so I.
You're talking specifically about whiskey cocktails.
Yeah.
She says that she doesn't think it's a known thing. Heard the term once coined out of Scotland.
Well, we should ask our Scottish friends.
Right.
Absolutely. You're all awesome too. We appreciate you all so much. Thanks
Yes.
for sticking around with us.
Absolutely. This was a fun one to end on. You all had me giggling back here. I love to see you two together. It's a real treat. And they were all having a great time too. So good class to end on. Thank you, everybody. Well, we will see you tomorrow. Until then, if you haven't already, like, subscribe. We have more classes, of course, all year round. Portland Cocktail Week, Camp Run Amok, both on Facebook and YouTube. So you can catch us there. And then students, we will see you tomorrow for our last workshop from 3 to 5 Eastern. And until then, goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.